great honor just to be all together in this place, and especially to be introducing Dr. Kreeft. And if you don't know who he is a professor at Boston College. He's been teaching there for a very long time. And he also teaches at the King's College in New York City. Very devoted professor, has a great passion to teach his students. And in this night, we have him here, and especially to ask him questions and to take advantage of his wisdom, what he can share with us, and to dialogue. He is someone who speaks all around. He goes to many different places. He is very active, and he just happens to be here with us tonight. He contributes to many different publications. He has written just about 80 books, and he continues to write and has more on the way. So if you have an opportunity, do get one of his books and read it. And we are very thankful for him being out here, and we're just very providential that it ended up being this night, so more people can come and join us. And thank you very much. Dr. Kreeft, welcome.
All right, let's do some basic preliminaries first. I'll talk for about 45 minutes. We have almost 2 hours, because the most important thing is dialogue. Dialogue is closer to the nature of reality than monologue, because God is a Trinity, and dialogue is almost trialogue. So most of you are Catholics, which means you believe in purgatory, so you're very patient. Since most monologues are dull and almost all dialogues are interesting, I expect that you extend your patience to me and sit through a purgatory of a talk in order to get to the really exciting part where you get to talk and we get to dialogue. And both in the monologue part and in the dialogue part, I would like each of you to do me a favor. Each of you is only one person, and there are about 300 people here. And most of you are thinking, oh, I'm only 1 out of 300 people, therefore I have only 1/300th of the responsibility to listen and to talk and to think and to search for truth. So just imagine that you are alone with me. There's only 3 of us here, you and me and God. And that's true. From God's point of view, you are alone. All his attention is on you. Not 1/300th of his attention, all of his attention. So if you put yourself in that mindset, I think something will happen that won't happen if you're in the mindset of, I'm only 1 out of 300. My talk is about truth and tolerance. I like it when people tell me what to talk about, because that's half my work. The title of a talk is really a question, and the talk is the answer. And getting a question out is half the work. People don't realize how hard it is to get a question out, to really care about a question, to look at that question as a cat looks at a mouse, or a hunter looks at a deer. People also don't realize how many answers there are out there. Our lives are confusing not because there's a paucity of answers, because there's few answers or none. Our lives are confusing because there's so many answers. Getting answers is easy, asking questions is hard. So you've done half my work for me. Whoever assigned this question to me, thank you very much. This is why, by the way, in my college courses, I never tell students what to write about. Give me essay topics, they say. No, I will not rob you of half your work. Truth and tolerance. Hurrah for both. They fit together. If you don't believe in truth, if you are a truth relativist, if you are a Pontius Pilate who said, truth, schmooth, who cares about truth? What is that anyway? Then it's impossible to think that tolerance is true or good. So the two are not in contrast. We tend to think that truth is hard and old-fashioned and justice and judgmental and all of that sort of thing. Tolerance is nice and soft and loving and merciful and easy and modern. Wrong. Wrong. Truth and tolerance go together, like apple and pie or ham and eggs. If you don't have one, you don't have the other. And we are living in a society which is increasingly not believing in truth, in the simple, commonsensical, old-fashioned notion of objective truth that judges our minds, all of them, rather than a truth that I somehow negotiate or create or make. In fact, on the most important issues in human life, namely what is the meaning of human life, our own supreme judicial authority, the Supreme Court, has said pretty much what Pontius Pilate said. In the 1992 Casey decision, Justice Anthony Kennedy, in the famous, slip the tongue, sorry, Sigmund Freud. Said that among the deepest forms of liberty, essential to liberty, is the right to decide for yourself the meaning of life and the mystery of human existence. In other words, God, you're sitting in my seat. Get off the throne. This is what Pope Benedict called the dictatorship of relativism. Now that's a strange juxtaposition. Once again, we think of dictatorship as hard and nasty and imposing, that's right. And we think of relativism as something nice and soft and tolerant, that's wrong. Relativism becomes inevitably dictatorial. Mussolini can teach us that. Unlike Hitler, Mussolini was a philosopher. And he writes, fascism is relativism from the premise that there is no eternal, absolute, hard, unyielding truth. From the premise that there are no prophets, there is no one who is a minister of truth. The fascist draws the logical conclusion that every one of us has the right to create his own truth and to enforce it with all the energy of which he is capable, unquote. So this apparently very theoretical topic, what is truth, what is tolerance, is extraordinarily practical to our society today. I don't think we can preserve democracy or freedom without truth. All the founding fathers are very clear about that. Freedom without truth is not true freedom. Love without truth is not true love. Happiness without truth is not true happiness. And tolerance without truth is not true tolerance. But in order to address this very, very practical question, the question of are we inevitably, maybe very slowly, maybe very nicely, maybe very softly, and certainly not in a Nazi or a fascist way, that's ridiculous, we don't go in for that sort of stuff, but inevitably we are heading towards Brave New World. I hope you all read Brave New World. It's the most prophetic book of modern times. It's us. It was written in 1932, could have been written today. And we're already more than halfway there. And if you are at all concerned about our society, about Western civilization, about America, and you should be, please read that book. It's amazingly prophetic. So this is an incredibly practical topic, and therefore we have to take a very careful, theoretical, abstract, philosophical attitude towards it. The practical and the theoretical are not opposites. One of the most practical things that was ever invented was the atomic bomb, and behind that was the whole theory of Einsteinian relativity. Theory and practice go together. And in order to figure out anything about practice, you need theory. In order to drive down the road, you need a good set of eyes and a good roadmap. So I'm going to try to use some basic philosophical skills, like defining terms, and I'm trying to be very theoretical in focusing on just what truth means and just what tolerance means, not just for the sake of scholarship or the sake of curiosity, but for the sake of saving this civilization that we know and love. From the time of the beginning of modern philosophy, you could date that to Francis Bacon, to Niccolo Machiavelli, to René Descartes. The question of truth is central. How do you know truth? How do you refute skepticism? How do you find certainty? There was not much of a crisis of truth before modern times, before 400 or 500 years ago. I think the human race grows rather like an individual grows. Little kids are naive, they're innocent, they're trusting. They don't ask fundamental questions. How do you know? Once in a while they do, but not in a deeply fundamental way. But then you become a teenager, and you worry about yourself. Who am I? Am I beautiful? Am I ugly? Do people laugh at me? Do I have zits? What am I going to do with the rest of my life? Am I going to have friends? Modern man is a teenager. By the way, I use standard English, so I use inclusive language. Man means males and females equally. If that offends you, I'm sorry. Modern man is a teenager, and therefore naturally questions himself and wonders if he's capable of knowing the truth. He's not naive anymore. And that's a natural development, that's fine. Asking questions is great. Jesus Christ never once discouraged a question. He never said to his disciples, don't ask so many questions. But there are answers. The reason to ask a question is to get an answer. The reason to be open-minded is because you hope there's truth. The reason you open your mouth is you hope you can fill it with some food and chomp down on it. But if reason can't know truth, and by reason I don't just mean clever reasoning, I mean all forms of intelligence, the heart as well as the head, and intuition as well as reasoning, and common sense as well as scientific method, our intellect is a much more complicated thing than we usually think. The old meaning of reason is a very big and broad one, and a very humane one. If reason can't find truth, if reasoning, as Freud says, is only rationalizing, and Freud is one of the most influential thinkers in our culture, and his most philosophical book, his last complete book, Civilization and Its Discontents, is a questioning of whether there is such a thing as a meaning to life, a purpose to life. It's a very clever book. I highly recommend it. It's a good read. But at the end, he finally says, after all this discussion about civilization and whether it's a good thing and the relation between civilization and sexuality and all the rest of the Freudian stuff, there's only one thing that I'm certain of. It's on the very last page. That all our reasoning is only rationalizing. That we are desiring animals and our brains are at the service of our desires. So reasoning is nothing but rationalizing, giving excuses for what you want to think. Well, that's the only sentence in the book that couldn't possibly be true. He claims that it's the only thing he's certain of. That's the only thing you can be absolutely certain is false, because if that's true, it's self-contradictory. If all reasoning is rationalizing, so is that. You see, all forms of skepticism are self-contradictory. Simple skepticism. There is no truth. Is that true? A little more complicated skepticism. Truth is not objective. Is that an objective truth? Truth is only probable, not certain. Is that certain? Truth is particular, not universal. Is that a universal truth? truth is relative, not absolute. Is that an absolute truth? Is relativism absolute? You can't get out of that, no matter how you nuance it. If reasoning is only rationalizing, then we can't have a civilization, because civilization is based on, come, let us reason together. We don't desire together, we desire different things. There are natural conflicts between friends, between family members, between tribes, between nations, between interest groups. If there is no objective truth, and if reason can't know objective truth, then all you can do is fight. You can fight in a gentle way, but you can't reason, and therefore you can't be together. So the presupposition of any society is some stable truth about something that everybody admits. Everybody noticed that during the presidential debates, there were no debates. Those are not debates. Those are show-off rhetorical contests. How come debates are so rare? Because we don't believe in truth. If there's no truth, well, why debate? Well, just to show off. Look, I'm cleverer than you are. I can insult you more than you can insult me. Ha ha. That's not a debate. The end of a debate is truth. The end of a debate is like the end of a scientific experiment in a laboratory. Here are two scientists. They're testing out two different theories. And the theories contradict each other. And at least one of them must be false. And both scientists accept the same data and accept the same principles and accept the same method. And they check each other's results. And if they're honest, they say, oh, good, you refuted me. Thank you very much. We both found the truth. We both win. We don't have that kind of debate anymore. Socrates had it. Socrates is one of the great founders of Western civilization. We have to recover that. For some reason or other, a lot of people in our civilization think that's narrow-minded and dogmatic. It's exactly the opposite. It's humble. What's dogmatic is, I'm smarter than you are. That's dogmatic. What's humble is, there is objective truth, and I don't know it all, and therefore I'm going to ask questions about it. Come, do it with me. And you think differently than I do, and let's just search for the truth together, and whoever finds it, we both win. You don't hear that much anymore. What a pity. If there's no truth, or if you can't know it with your intellect, then how do you settle disputes? There's only one way: force. Either emotional force or physical force. Physical force is the hard way. That's hard dictatorship or hard totalitarianism. Emotional force is the soft way. That's soft totalitarianism. I hope you've all read at least parts of Alexis de Tocqueville's great classic, Democracy in America, which is the profoundest book anybody ever wrote about democracy. And he warns that in a democracy, you can slide towards totalitarianism. It'll be a soft totalitarianism, in his words, rather than a hard one. But it'll be a totalitarianism. Because democracy and totalitarianism are not opposites. They do not logically exclude each other, because they're answers to two different questions. Democracy is an answer to the question, where is the sovereignty? Who gets to decide? And the answer is the people, or at least the majority. Totalitarianism is an answer to a different question. How much of human life do the public authorities have control over? And the answer is all of it. You can have a democratic totalitarianism or a totalitarian democracy. All right, that's my prophetic warning to begin with. Now, let's back up and analyze some terms, especially the two key terms, truth and tolerance. What is truth? That's a very easy question to answer. We all know the answer to that question. One of the great philosophical teachers of the 20th century, Mortimer Adler, used to run a newspaper column. It was a kind of a philosophical Dear Abby. What do the philosophers say about this? And he collected 101 of them into a little book, 101 Great Ideas. And he only had one column of a newspaper to answer the question, so he had a structure that he used all the time. In the first paragraph, he detailed the question. He defined the question. In the second paragraph, he'd give two different opinions about it from two different philosophical schools. And then in the third paragraph, he'd say, my personal opinion is that this school has a better argument than that school, and that the truth is probably this rather than that. Here are my reasons. Only once did he depart from the pattern. He always began with, this is a hard question. This is a mysterious question. That's why we need philosophers. Once he departed from that pattern, and he said, this is not a hard question at all. This is a very easy question. We all know the answer to it. And the question is, what is truth? Old Aristotle was the most commonsensical of all philosophers, defined truth in a wonderful definition that has nothing but words of one syllable in it. If a man says of what is true that if a man says of what is that it is, or if he says of what is not that it is not, he speaks the truth. But if he says of what is that it is not, or if he says what of what is not that it is, then he does not speak the truth. Isn't that wonderful? It takes a genius to be that simple. It's very easy to speak in polysyllables. It's very hard to translate everything into words of one syllable. This is why Mother Teresa was a genius. She hardly ever used words of more than one syllable, and nobody ever refuted her. Aristotle was a lot like Mother Teresa. We all know that that's what truth means. Truth means telling it like it is. It's true that this is Oregon. Why? Because it's Oregon. It's true that I wasn't born on Mars, even though you might doubt that, because I wasn't born on Mars. It's true that I'm not holding an elephant in my hand, because I'm not holding an elephant in my hand. It's true that I have a thumbnail on my thumb, because I do have a thumbnail on my thumb. Everybody knows that's what we mean by truth. Now, that old meaning of truth is, first of all, commonsensical. We all know it without any education at all. It's innate, it's universally known, it's democratic. It's objective. We discover it, we don't create it. It's hard, it's impersonal, we don't make it. It's not negotiable, it's not squishable like the Pillsbury Doughboy. And it's kind of naive. Well, of course that's truth. That's not questionable. We all know that. It's kind of a faith in common sense to know that truth. And you know it in your mind. Now, the new meaning of truth, the fashionable meaning of truth, among both philosophers and ideologues and many ordinary people, is exactly the opposite. Instead of being commonsensical, it's sophisticated and elitist. Instead of being objective and discovered, it's subjective and created or invented. Instead of being impersonal, it's personal. It's my truth. I feel that this must be true. It's negotiable. Instead of being naive and open-minded and trusting, it's suspicious. And instead of being known by the mind, it's created by the will or by the emotions. The hard version is it's created by the will. I say so. My will to power trumps yours. Or the soft version is, well, I feel. Well, feelings are wonderful, and it's fine to feel, but you don't feel that. Students don't say, I think that anymore. They say, I feel that. That's an absolute confusion. I feel sick. You can argue with me? No, I feel well. Feelings are subjective. Thoughts claim to be objective. Most people thought that Hillary Clinton would beat Donald Trump. They were wrong. Half the people thought Hillary Clinton would make a better president than Donald Trump. The other half thought Donald Trump would make a better president than Hillary Clinton. Half are wrong. We don't know which half yet.
Never will.
Well, some truths are hard to prove, but I think truths claim to be objective and in principle provable. I feel truths aren't truths at all. I feel a sweet tender feeling towards Donald Trump. Well, that's nice. I have a psychiatrist for you if you need it. That's not an argument, you see. It's not an argument. Okay, obviously I'm defending the old notion of truth, the simple, commonsensical, objective, hard, impersonal, non-negotiable, intellectual truth rather than the soft, squishy feeling truth. Because if you have that hard intellectual truth, you're not going to have the dictatorship of relativism. But if you have the soft, squishy truth, you are. Well, we'll come back to that in a moment. We haven't finished our analysis of truth yet. Truth exists in two places. Truth is a correspondence between a mind and something outside a mind. The correspondence between my thought that I have a thumbnail and the fact that I do have a thumbnail is the truth in my mind as corresponding to the world. There's another kind of truth. There's also a truth in things that correspond to the mind that designed them. For instance, if you're painting a picture and you want it to look the opposite of the Mona Lisa, and you're so haunted by the Mona Lisa that your picture looks too much like the Mona Lisa, that's not true. Not your intention. Or if a little kid is trying to draw a lion and it looks like an elephant, that's not true. Not true to the kid's intention. So the thing conforming to the mind is the truth in art. The mind conforming to the thing is the truth in science. So if there's a God and he designed the universe, he's an artist, not a scientist. His truth is a truth that he creates. How come there is light? Because God said, let there be light. He thought it up. How come there are hobbits? Tolkien, like God, said, let there be hobbits, and there were hobbits. He thought it up. This is why art is a signature of the image of God. Not just the mind and the moral will, but also the creative art. That's equally a part of the image of God. We create because we're created by the Creator. So when we do science, we're reading God's art after him. Okay, so there's truth in things as corresponding to the mind that designed them and created them, and there's truth in the mind that discovers those things. How do you know the truth then? That's the practical question. Well, it's a lot of ways, not just one. First of all, it's common sense. We all have it. It's common. Secondly, there's faith. Most of the stuff that you know, most of the truth you know because you had faith. You believed your mommy, your daddy, your teachers, your textbooks, your newspaper. Did you figure it all out for yourself? Look at the history of science, that wonderful achievement in Western civilization. How many of those experiments did you check out for yourself? Probably none, or close to none. So you believe what people said. You have good reasons for believing. It's a secular faith, it's not a religious faith, but most of what we know by faith, by trust. And then thirdly, there's religious faith, which is just secular faith aimed at the most worthy object of all, God. If there's a God, and if he's spoken, then that's the most reliable way to know truth. And then there's philosophy. Philosophy goes beyond common sense and beyond mere faith. It asks questions, and beyond religious faith too. It doesn't substitute faith for reason. But from Socrates on, philosophy is one of the great achievements of the human race. And we're all philosophers. You can't say I'm not a philosopher. That's a bad philosophy, but it's a philosophy. And then finally, there's science and the scientific method. The greatest discovery in the entire history of science has been the scientific method, because that's like a skeleton key that opens up all the other doors. And it's the most efficient method we've ever discovered for understanding the material universe. And no one of these five things is an enemy of any of the other four. Any more than the different parts of a symphony orchestra are the enemy of the other part, or any more than one color is an enemy of the other color. They're just different powers of the human mind. Now let's also look at the word truth. Let's do a little linguistics. Western civilization has three basic sources. Almost everything in Western civilization comes from either the Jews, the Greeks, or the Romans. And those three cultures and those three languages were the main languages of the ancient world. When Jesus was crucified, the sign on the cross was written in those three languages. The sign said, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Very significant that Pilate deliberately said, "Let it be written in Hebrew and in Latin and in Greek." He didn't mean it this way, God did. The whole world is responsible for Jesus' death. It's the same, it's almost a joke, it's not funny, but it's the same irony that you find in Mel Gibson's movie, The Passion of the Christ. At the moment of crucifixion, when Jesus is nailed to the cross, you remember the Roman is a new soldier and he doesn't know how to hold the hammer and to get that nail through Christ's hand. And you hear a voice. You don't see a person, you hear a voice. "Here, let me show you how to do that." And you see a hand, just a hand, take the hammer from the Roman and hold the nail, and that hand nails Christ to the cross. That's Mel Gibson's hand. He's making a statement. I'm responsible for the crucifixion. He died for me. You are too. That's the same point Pontius Pilate made, although he didn't deliberately make it. So the whole world is conspiring there. Well, let's look at the word for truth in those three cultures, because that's us. That's our roots, our ancestors. We've inherited those three. The Greek word for truth, let's start with that. Aletheia. The first a is a negative. Lethe is the name of a river in Greek mythology. Some of you know that. According to Greek mythology, it's the river of forgetfulness. When you die, you forget your previous life. You either cross in one version or drink from another version that river. So aletheia means not forgetting, means remembering. So that's a very intellectual notion, a very inward notion. Somehow, unconsciously, I know the truth, but I've forgotten it. So I've got to go inside and get it. I've got to figure out what the access code is to bring that hardware up into the software. The Greeks were the inventors of philosophy and science, the great intellectuals. That's one meaning of truth, okay? Second, the Latin word for truth, veritas. It's not so much an intellectual word as a moral word. It means rightness. Rightness where? Rightness in thinking. Thinking is a subdivision of living or acting. The Romans were very practical people. They didn't invent a single new philosophy. They imported all their philosophies from Greece. So truth has a moral dimension to it. It means right action in the realm of thinking. So it's not so much the intellect as the will that's the key there. It chooses to do the right thing, to think the right thought. Then there's the Hebrew word for truth. You find it in the Old Testament. It's emeth, and it means faithfulness, or trust, or trustability. It's one of the attributes of God. God is totally trustable. I don't know Hebrew myself, but I'm told by the scholars that in ancient Hebrew, the word had a physical meaning. A bucket had emeth if the bottom would never fall out, no matter how many stones you put in it. Or a rope had emeth if it would never break, no matter how heavy the burden is in it. So a person has emeth if you can lean on them and they'll never break, and that's God. And we're supposed to be like that. So truth is not so much in an idea as it is for the Greeks, or in a human action and choice as it is for the Romans, but in a person's character. Trustability. I think all three meanings of truth are equally important. And to argue about which one is the most important, are you an intellectualist, or are you a voluntarist, or are you a personalist, that's silly. You need all three. Because we are all three. Okay, that's just a a sketch about what truth has meant to the great minds of the past. It's not a sketch about what things are true or how you apply the notion of truth. It's simply a definition of what the word means. All right, in light of that, let's go to our second word, tolerance. What's tolerance? Well, that too has an old meaning and a new meaning. The old meaning is you tolerate things that are evil. Some things that are evil you don't tolerate, but some things that are evil you do tolerate. For instance, you don't tolerate a cancer that's going to kill you, but you do tolerate vomiting from chemo. You don't tolerate murder, but you do tolerate private drunkenness. It harms people, harms lives, but for the government to interfere there would do more harm than good, so you tolerate it. But you don't tolerate anything good, you tolerate something evil. The old meaning is also judgmental. In order to say that's evil, you're judging. People say all the time, don't be judgmental. And they can't possibly mean that in an absolute and universal way, because no prisoner in court ever said to the judge, but judge, I don't feel guilty. You have to be judgmental. You have to judge whether that's another car coming, or a bicycle, or a motorcycle, or a plane, in order to know where to steer your car. So you have to judge between good and evil in order to be tolerant of some evils. Also, the old meaning of tolerance is pragmatic. You tolerate the lesser evil. You don't do evils, but you sometimes tolerate the lesser evil. War, for instance. War's a horrible thing. War's one of the stupidest ideas ever invented. Hey, we've got problems, we've got conflicts, how shall we solve them? Oh, I know, let's go out and kill each other tomorrow morning. But sometimes you have to fight a war. You have to defend the innocent against the guilty. You can't let the bullies win. If we were all pacifists, soon there would be no pacifists. They'd kill us. So that's a rather spectacular example of tolerating the lesser evil. The new meaning of tolerance is quite different. You tolerate everything. You don't tolerate evil, that's judgmental. Tolerate everything. Be non-judgmental. Wait a minute, isn't it right not to be judgmental? Didn't Jesus say, judge not that you be not judged? He certainly did. What did he mean by that? Don't judge sins? If that's what he said, he was not even a prophet, much less the Son of God, because all the prophets are judgmental. Well, we have to judge sins, but we shouldn't judge sinners. That's God's business. We can't read another person's heart, but we can observe his actions. So you cannot possibly have a society without being judgmental of actions. And you can't possibly be a good scientist or a good philosopher without being judgmental of ideas. And you can't possibly be a good politician without also being judgmental of ideas. That idea is not going to make for health and happiness. That idea is. So we have to make a very sharp distinction between sins and sinners, between people and ideas. And we have to love sins less and sinners more. And bad ideas less and bad people more. But if there's no objective truth, you can't make that distinction. You are your ideas. You are your choices. You are your lifestyle. You are your actions. It's your identity. No, it isn't. The Catholic Church, for instance, is almost the only public institution in the world today that does two things simultaneously says two things simultaneously about one of the most controversial issues, specific controversial issues in our society, namely homosexuality. On the one hand, it says, this is wrong, God disapproves, this is not right use of sex. On the other hand, it says homosexual persons are created in God's image, are to be loved, and are called to sanctity. do not hate or discriminate against persons, but hate and discriminate against those ideas and practices which harm human persons, whatever they may be. And one side doesn't like the first thing, and the other side doesn't like the second thing. Love the sinner, hate the sin, whatever it is. Same thing is true about transsexuals. That's the new controversy. Here are people who have a problem, a real problem, and we have to be listening and sympathetic to them. But on the other hand, we have to believe in objective truth. There's a man who feels like a woman and thinks he's a woman, wants to be a woman. He isn't. Biology is destiny. On the other hand, he has a serious problem in getting his soul and his body together. So we can't just ignore it. So what do? Well, we give him compassionate psychiatric treatment, and we listen, and we treat him as the human being and the intrinsically valuable individual that is made in God's image, that in fact he is. But we don't compromise on objective truth. Here are the facts. Here is what you're doing. You're going to get your sex organs cut off or have an operation. You're going to mutilate your body because you have this strange thought that you aren't what you really are. Well, we're going to have to help you to integrate that somehow. And the way to do it is not with a knife. The way to do it is much more gentle than that. One side doesn't want to listen to them, the other side wants to say anything goes. Unless you can make that distinction between objective truth and subjective, non-judgmental love of persons, you can't make that distinction. Now, almost nobody in our society, I suppose a few, but certainly not the majority, wants to say, the hell with people, they're no good. Judge them. I don't love them. Nobody wants to say that, thank God. A lot of people, though, want to say, I don't believe in objective truth, that's being judgmental, that's being dictatorial, what right do you have to say that's truth, it's just your truth? Either of those two mistakes equally lead to a kind of totalitarianism. One's hard, the other's soft. You have to say both. You have to make that distinction. You see, the logical problem with relativism, especially moral relativism, and its claim that it's more tolerant. Logical problem there is that if all moral values are only relative and subjective, then so is the value of tolerance. Only a moral absolutist and objectivist can take tolerance seriously as a moral duty. In other words, if we tolerate everything, then we'll also tolerate intolerance. Why not? That's why relativism leads to intolerance, to the dictatorship of relativism, which is exactly what we find today on many campuses. You're not allowed to say certain things. Many people will say, well, I don't tolerate intolerance, I'll tolerate anything else. Why make that exception? And isn't that self-contradictory? I had a most interesting conversation some years ago at Boston College with a homosexual activist who had written an article which I had read, and he gave a speech based on that article, which I didn't hear, but I met him afterwards at the speech. He was a disciple of Andrew Sullivan. He was a very intelligent man. I never met him, I wanted to, but I was very intelligent too, so I came up to him afterwards and I asked, I got a couple questions for you. His talk was something like, a homosexual Catholic evaluates his oppressive church. So you knew how the talk was going to go. So I said, I just identified myself as a Catholic Christian who believes everything the church teaches, including those two terribly important things about homosexuality, equally important, both of them, both non-compromisable. And I said, what I don't understand is why you homosexual activists always say that if we condemn your actions, we're condemning the person. This fundamental distinction you deny. You can't condemn what we do without condemning what we are. I said, why do you think you are nothing but what you do? Isn't that insulting to yourself? And why are you almost the only people that do that? You always do it. I always hear that. You condemn what I do, you condemn me. He said, I think I can answer that question. I said, I'm listening. And I was very serious. I wanted to learn something, and I did. He taught me something that day that I didn't know before. He said, well, do a little thought experiment. Suppose you Catholics, were the minority, and you had been persecuted and hated, and we now said to you, well, you know, we love you, but we hate what you do. And we're going to try to argue you out of it, but we love you. But we hate your faith, and we hate your cathedrals, and we hate your sacraments, and we hate your Bible, and we hate your priest, and we hate your hymns, and we hate your saints, but we love you. How would you feel? And I opened my mouth, because philosophers talk a lot, and God said, shut up, you fool, listen to him. So I did, and I thought for a minute, and I said, you know, you're right. You taught me something I didn't know before. I would feel exactly the way you do. I would feel personally threatened. Yeah, thank you for teaching me that. Okay, now I understand how you feel. But wait a minute, I got a question for you. Look at your title. A homosexual Catholic evaluates his oppressive church. Which of those two nouns is your identity, homosexual or Catholic? The reason I feel threatened, if you said, we love you, but we hate your God, is that my God is my identity, my religion, my absolute. So which of those two things is your absolute? And he smiled and he said, all right, we've taught each other something today. Now, I don't know if everybody would be quite that honest and open-minded, but I really do think we both learned something terribly important. This issue, and maybe some others too, but certainly the issue of homosexuality is not like most moral issues, like war, for instance. Somebody makes a big mistake if you do or you don't fight a war, and lives are at stake. But that doesn't threaten your whole identity. That's not your essence. Religion is your essence. If not, you're not really religious. Religion is your relation to the absolute. That gives you your most fundamental identity. And if that's not God, it's got to be something else. So this is not just an ethical issue, a moral issue, a philosophical issue, or even a psychological issue. It's a religious issue. Even if many people say it isn't. It's an issue about absolutes, and that explains the passion of it. It also explains the passion of Muslim terrorists. In Islam, politics is not secondary, it's essential to the religion. God himself has revealed the ideal political order and insists that everybody in the world be converted to it. So it's not just a political issue. Politics is negotiable, religion isn't. One of the main problems with Islam is that politics is religion. Although there are exceptions to that. That's much too easy a generalization. I think until we understand that, we can't deal intelligently with the issue. I'm not demonizing it. I'm not saying it's hopeless. I'm not saying, this is Christ versus Antichrist. I'm just saying that it's got to be dealt with on the plane of religion, not just on the plane of public morality or philosophical morality or rational morality. Isn't it interesting that moral relativists in our society always direct their moral relativism to one area, sex? I never heard anybody who was a moral relativist about nuclear warfare or about environmental pollution, although that's somewhat pragmatic in a matter of degree, or about torture, although there are a few people that justify it, or about rape, or about murder, or even about insider trading, or even about smoking. mean, even people who smoke feel guilty about it. But if it has anything to do with sex, let's be relativist. That's very strange. The sexual revolution is not just a revolution in behavior, it's a revolution in philosophy. I think the essence of the sexual revolution is to look at sex not as something that you are, but something that you do. It's Gnostic. The Gnostics were spiritualists. They believed that you were simply your mind, you were simply your thoughts, your spirit. Your body was an instrument, a tool. So it didn't matter what you did with your body. That was a very strange philosophy, and it's very bad psychology. It's as if you're a ghost that is living in a haunted house called your body. But very many people believe that. And the sense of the sacredness of the body, the sense that that's me, it's not my body, that's me. I can't take it off as I take my clothes off. That's rare. For the first time in a long while. So once you treat your body as an instrument, it's simply a machine, and you learn which buttons produce pleasure and which buttons don't, and that's it. What more is there? Nothing. That's a radical revolution. That's not just a revolution in behavior, that's a revolution in your identity. And it's so powerful a revolution that it has overcome very deep instincts, like the instinct of motherhood. 50 years ago, certainly 100 years ago, almost no one would believe that abortion would be not only legal, but generally accepted. What? For a mother to deliberately kill and pay a healer to kill her own child? That's accepted by society? How is that possible? Motherhood is the strongest instinct in the world, almost. Here's another example of how radical the sexual revolution is. The Catholic Church is the only institution in the world that does not believe in divorce. I love to argue in a friendly way with my Protestant friends. I have a lot of them, and they usually allow divorce, and they often say, the Catholic Church is too tough and too uncompromising about divorce. And I say, no, it's just the opposite. We're humble. You're not. You're arrogant, not us. Because Jesus Christ, in all three of the first three Gospels, explicitly forbade divorce. And you want to change him. You want to edit his mail. We just deliver it intact. Suppose you went to a society, some other part of the world, and you learned that 50% of the citizens in that society committed suicide. Would you say that's a really sick society? Well, who are the citizens in a society? They're not just individuals, they're families. According to the Bible, one flesh, the two become one. It's not just a friendship, that's not just a partnership, that's not just a contract, it's not even just a covenant. A new reality is created there. Half of our marriages commit suicide. That's what divorce is. No society can last on that basis. No society has ever lasted without stable families. And the four most stable societies in history all had a very high respect for the family. Jewish society, Confucian society, ancient Roman society, and Muslim society. All of them had faults, but they were stable, they were long-lasting. We're not going to last that long. So the sexual revolution is not just a thing that takes up a little area over here and leaves the rest of life untouched. It leaves everything touched. And its justification is relativism, at least in that area. In fact, sexual relativism is the basic excuse for general moral relativism. As I said, people don't yet apply it to most of the other areas, but it's inevitable that it will. Cancers metastasize. Well, I hope I don't sound like a cranky, old-fashioned preacher of doom, because I believe that there are two equally destructive errors. You can absolutize what's only relative, or you can relativize what's absolute. And I think many of our ancestors made disastrous mistakes in the first area. They absolutized what was relative. They made life or death issues out of things. The Inquisition was an example of that. But just because our ancestors erred in one direction doesn't justify us in erring in the opposite direction. To relativize the absolute, if anything, is even worse than absolutizing the relative. Because if you don't have an absolute, then well, what's the relative relative to? It makes no sense. So the first question is not, is there an absolute? But what is it? There has to be one. And if it's not God, it's got to be an idol. And there's all sorts of idols around. Without God, without an absolute, what do you have left? Whatever. That's not a good basis for a society. And it's certainly not a good basis for freedom. Free to do what? Certainly not a good basis for democracy. The people rule. Yeah, in the name of what? What distinguishes a people from a mob? I'll give you one more book to read after you read Brave New World. Read a somewhat more difficult book, but it's a much more philosophical book by C.S. Lewis. I think it's the most important thing he ever wrote. The title is The Abolition of Man. He argues in that book that moral relativism changes your nature. If you really become a moral relativist, not just in words, but in belief, then you've produced a kind of conscience-ectomy. You're still clever, you still got a mind, and you still got an animal body, you still got guts, but you don't have the heart in between. You ripped out your heart. And that's not a human being anymore. You can abolish your humanity. At least you can deeply suppress it. Maybe you can't abolish it. Maybe the natural moral law is, as Thomas Aquinas says, and as St. Paul seems to say in Romans, so written into the heart that you can't rip it out. You can't rip out your motherboard. But we're sure as hell trying. Oh my dear, I've gone almost an hour. I'm going to give myself the hook at this point, and I'm going to ask our MC to say a few words while you can go out in the hall and dance up and down and kiss each other and whatever you do, and then we'll come back in 5 minutes and have questions.